Well, good afternoon and welcome back to the public hearings for the committee's inquiry into cashless gaming in the ACT. I would like to restate our housekeeping arrangements. All mobile phones or laptops are to be switched off or in silent mode. Witnesses are to speak one at a time and will need to speak directly into the microphone or your computer, or Hansard to be able to hear and transcribe you accurately. The proceedings today are being recorded and transcribed by Hansard and will be published. The proceedings are also being broadcast and web streamed live. When taking a question on notice, it would be useful if witnesses use the words, "I will take that question on notice." This will help the committee and witnesses to confirm questions taken on notice from the transcript. We welcome witnesses from the Salvation Army, ATCOS and the Alliance for Gambling Reform. For the Hansard record, could you each please state your name and the capacity in which you appear? We'll perhaps start here with Mrs. Bennett.
Carol Bennett, I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Gambling Reform.
Thank you.
Tim?
Devin Balls.
Tim's.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So we'll cover with Devin, sorry.
Devin Balls, CEO of ATCOS.
Corinne Dobson, Head of Policy at ATCOS.
Kirtana Chandramogan, Policy and Advocacy Advisor for the Salvation Army.
Jennifer Kakaldi, General Manager, Policy and Advocacy for the Salvation Army.
Emily Seiler, Financial Counsellor at Salvation Army Money Care.
Mr. Costello?
Tim Costello, Chief Advocate for the Alliance for Gambling Reform.
Thank you. And I remind witnesses of the protection and obligations afforded by parliamentary privilege and draw your attention to the privilege statement. Witnesses must tell the truth. Giving false or misleading evidence will be treated as a serious matter and may be considered contempt of the Assembly. Could you each please confirm that you understand the implications of the statement and that you agree to comply with it? If we just go around the room and give your affirmation to your compliance to the privilege statement.
Yes, I confirm.
Yes, I confirm.
Yes.
Yes, I confirm.
Reverend Costello?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. So look, we are happy to give a very, very brief few minutes to any opening statement, recognising that I'm pretty confident you'll be able to say everything you would like to say in response to questions, but I will give that opportunity just for this session. So, Ms. Bennett,
Yes.
would you like to lead us off?
Thank you. So thanks for inviting us here today. The ACT is generally considered to be a progressive territory that accepts the importance of governing for public benefit. We would say that can't be said to be the case when it comes to gambling reform. If it could, the ACT would have already accepted the inevitability of a carded system, including mandatory pre-commitment with binding and reasonable default limits. A carded gambling system could be groundbreaking in reducing gambling harm and placing limits on the behaviour of a predatory gambling industry that costs Australians more than $25 billion in losses every year. That's more per capita than any other country on the planet. In the ACT, that figure is growing each year. Canberrans lost $188 million in the last year alone. That's $16 million every month. That's just to poker machines. Over $1.2 billion has been lost in the last decades. These are staggering losses for a small jurisdiction of under 500,000 people. The Alliance has already supported Dr Marissa Patterson's legislation for pokies for new developments in the ACT. We've worked with Attorney General Jane Rattenbury to look at other reforms to address gambling losses and harms, and that includes the central monitoring system, which the ACT is playing catch-up behind other jurisdictions on, and its capacity for setting loss limits and self-exclusion. The Alliance is firmly of the view that cashless gambling is not an end in itself, but collecting more sophisticated data about individual gamblers that's linked to an individualised mandatory cashless gambling card provides the opportunity to significantly reduce gambling harm. There's an avalanche of evidence. I know we've heard today questions about that evidence, but we know how a mandatory pre-commitment cashless card can work incredibly well to reduce gambling harm and disrupt organised crime and money laundering. The New South Wales Crime Commission report of 2022, for instance, made the recommendation to the New South Wales Government for this important reform. It's considered the gold standard, as the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation has recommended. In New South Wales, we know the Minns government has been reluctant to adopt this card, instead opting to kick the can down the road with the strong support of an industry that does not want scrutiny and accountability that will undoubtedly impact their bottom line. And that's the risk for the ACT, not adopting the reform measures that will address gambling harm and choosing instead to pander to an industry intent on maintaining lax regulation that enables it to generate enormous profit from gambling losses.
We'll finish soon, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, and of course you don't have to make an opening statement. As I said, you're sure you'll be able to answer your questions with your submissions. But would ADCOS like to make a brief opening statement?
Thank you very much. We'd echo the previous remarks and note broadly that ADCOS is very much in favour of cashless gaming, but that cashless gaming, if organised well, will do a great deal to reduce harms. If set up badly, will not have that effect and could in fact amplify harms. So design is going to be very important. ADCOS recommends daily and monthly betting caps, mandatory pre-commitment in all venues, a break after every hour of play, closure of EGM operations between 1 and 10 a.m. each day, and a spin rate of 3 seconds per game. I note Ms. Bennett's discussion about how industry can all too often shape legislation and policy in this area, and that is certainly a concern that ADCOS has. One thing that we would note, however, is that the ACT is effectively a laggard in this space, with most of the rest of the East Coast, at least to some extent, in front of us. Now that should be embarrassing, but it should also really have us concerned about what that means for money laundering. So estimations of the amount of money laundering in New South Wales alone put it in the hundreds of millions to billion plus per year. If we continue to stay behind other jurisdictions, we will absolutely become a focus for money laundering because Victoria, Queensland, and New South Wales are all out in front. And we would be the natural place where that would be redirected to. So I know there have been concern about cross-border effects for things like decriminalization of drugs. Those, I think, have not turned out to be realized, in part because the distribution of drugs remains illegal. However, we should be under no illusions that if we are the slowest jurisdiction to act, we will absolutely become a magnet for organized crime. Thank you.
Okay, and perhaps someone from Salvation Army?
Briefly, thank
Yes,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting and pay respects to elders past, present and future. For the Salvation Army, gambling harm is about so much more than just losing money. Gambling harm extends beyond the individual. It impacts on loved ones, it impacts on communities. In fact, we understand that for every one person who is harmed because they are gambling, there's another 6 people who are harmed because of that gambling. The adverse impact of gambling often leads to financial distress, mental health issues, and relationship breakdowns. From what we see, sadly, it's also associated with the exacerbation of family and domestic violence and substance use disorders. We had concerns about the move to cashless gaming in terms of it removing friction and that inconvenience and delay associated with using cash, and that it could result in greater gambling harm. That is why we are so appreciative of what this committee is doing in considering and centring safeguarding and gambling harm in the conversation about this transition. We believe that your work, as already said, can actually lead to a minimising of gambling harm. I won't enumerate all of the measures that we'd like. I think they have already been covered. But I do want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you so much for the work you're doing to consider how gambling harm can be affected by cashless gaming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And of course, you will have opportunity to say things that you feel you haven't quite covered in full. But I'll lead off with questions. There's been some discussion and perhaps different views on the value of a trial in the ACT of one of the cashless gaming options, including central monitoring system. New South Wales obviously has started a fresh trial and has other trials in other places. Tasmania has made a strong commitment, and as ATCOS has advised us, the Eastern Seaboard is a bit ahead of the ACT here. So what do you think, each of you think, about the value of undertaking a trial in the ACT, and what is it? I think I kind of know the answer to this, but if you're doing a trial, what would you actually want to see tested? Bear in mind that the range of clubs in the ACT is pretty wide, and the impact on smaller clubs of any measure is pretty significant. So what would you think is worth trying as a test? We might just start with the Alliance.
I guess we don't really support a trial. We don't support a trial in the ACT. What we've seen in New South Wales is the government being very unprepared to support the New South Wales Crime Commission #1 recommendation, which says that mandatory cashless gambling card with binding and default limits was the gold standard. We've also seen Crown in Victoria introduce that system. We're seeing the Victorian government currently consulting on rolling out that system. Every casino inquiry in the country, Queensland, New South Wales, Perth, Victoria, have all suggested that this be introduced, and it's inevitable it will be introduced at some point. The question is, and I think as Devon pointed out, getting those features that reduce gambling harm is really critical so that you don't actually increase gambling harm. But there's no reason why the ACT, as a tiny jurisdiction, mind you, we do make $188 million of losses per year, so we are certainly up there when it comes to gambling losses and harms. But, you know, why would we invest in a trial when all of the key recommendations from all of the inquiries, the Royal Commissions, the Crime Commission, the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation have already recommended that this be introduced, and the Tasmanian government are about to introduce it with those binding and default limits that they have researched well.
Thank you for that. We might move to ATCOS now.
We agree with those sentiments. We know that the scale of the trial in New South Wales, in terms of the number of poker machines, is about the same as the total number of poker machines in the ACT. We also know that the technology is not, we're not dealing with cutting edge technology here. So from a technological point of view, there's nothing to trial, right? Each of us probably in our wallets or handbags has a card which knows how much we've spent and is linked to certain limits and can limit how much we spend per day, our ATM or credit cards, right? Like the technology is pervasive and has been for many decades. So don't enable messages of technical difficulty to interfere with needed reform.
Okay.
Can I just add too? I think in terms of doing the trial, you mentioned the potential impact on some of those smaller venues. I do think that, and we are a small jurisdiction, as you mentioned, I think one thing we don't want to do is just have it in certain venues, because I think that inherently means that it just drives people potentially to other venues that may not have the system, so it then becomes problematic. And I think that, you know, I agree that we don't necessarily need to have the trial, but we need to make sure that we do have really a strong evaluation in place to understand what the effects of it are and making sure that we are avoiding those unintended impacts that Jennifer spoke about. Thank you.
And we would echo, we think we have enough evidence.
Thank you very much. Doctor, any
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Yes, so I had a tour yesterday of Crown Casino's cashless gaming, and I was very, very impressed on its pokies. And to impress me, it takes a lot of doing after 25 years. And I might say 25 years ago, It was the Productivity Commission that introduced the universal mandatory pre-commitment card. It reissued that in 2000, so that was 1999. 2010 it did do the same. 25 years on, we still do not have one universal mandatory pre-commitment card. And it's worth reflecting in another occasion on why that is and the power of the industry. Crown were required to do it by the Royal Commission. They did it 12 months ahead of the time they were required to do it on 3,000 machines. They showed me how it works in terms of loss limits there. It's 3 hours of play before you have to have a break, but loss limits, time limits, interventions now from people who are seeing, even if you have been thrashing the machine and haven't gone over your loss limit, but are showing practice that's harmful, they will intervene. They are offering ACT, Tasmania, anywhere else to say, we can show you how to do it. So when we talk about trial, the confusing meaning of this is, oh, let's see if it works. No, that's over. It works. Crown have done it. Required to do it. If trial means let's look at a best feature somewhere, but we are doing it, okay, we can live. I can live with that. But that's why our submission is against a trial in the sense of we don't know that this will work. Where the industry says, oh, loss limits doesn't work, they're wrong. Where they say, oh, there'll be displacement, they'll go into sports betting, they're wrong. All the research shows they're wrong. If we say, yes, we're doing pre-commitment and we can iron out any technical difficulties, that sense of trial is a different meaning.
Okay, thank you. We might move to Dr. Patterson for a substantive.
One of the things that's been talked about for decades as well, but has never actually really been implemented in Australia, is third-party exclusions. I was wondering, I mean, we've had an example in the last week in the ACT where third-party exclusions could have very much come into play to reduce the harm. I'm interested in your views on this, and should this be something that the ACT pursues as part of reducing the harm?
Well, from our point of view, yes, because we strongly support self-exclusion, but third-party exclusion also has some benefits, and for all the reasons you've talked about. I think the National Bet Stop scheme also enables third-party exclusion, so we do have a working system in place that is demonstrating the benefits of that. I mean, obviously that will come over time, but it can be done, it should be done, and if it's a way of reducing harm, we support that. Did you want to add to that, Tim? Or?
Yeah, no, I agree with that comment, absolutely.
Jennifer or Devon?
Actually, Emily, would you like to quickly talk about some of the barriers to self-exclusion?
Yeah, big barriers to self-exclusion. So I'm a financial counsellor, so I deal with all kinds of people experiencing financial difficulties, not just gambling harm. One thing we do very commonly see with gambling harm is people's inability to address it from either actual barriers or perceived barriers. So one thing I'll see quite often is someone with a lot of cash withdrawals and won't address it with me, disengage from the service. Another thing I see quite often is barriers to addressing it. When we finally do, it's a snowball effect, we can address it from there. So there are definitely lots of barriers to accessing assistance for gambling, and self-exclusion is just another, I guess, barrier to get over and go, well, I need to do something about this, and then doing it as well. So the more friction there is, the more checks and balances in place to get to that point, the more harm that's going to minimise.
So a third party to assist with that would be very valuable.
Yes, all that we might add is that it is a potentially useful arrow in the quiver, but other reforms should not be delayed to enable that, because it does have some complexities that the other features that I think we've all supported do not.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Braddock, substantive.
Sorry. Mr. Bowles, your answer just sparked the thoughts of my thinking. In terms of, I want to understand the criticality of the central monitoring system, and also in terms of time aspect to that. Is it worthwhile holding off on that to sort out other aspects of the cashless gaming first, or should that be just the government continue on its proposal and test the market on that?
Thank you very much. I think central monitoring is really important because we know that people who are experiencing dependence on gambling will simply switch venues. And if you have any kind of limit that's per venue, it's very simple to walk from one venue to the next. And that's absolutely what will occur. So having a system that encompasses the whole of the jurisdiction is absolutely essential if we want to minimize gambling harms. Again, what I would say is this should not be terribly technically difficult. It's technology that's been around for many years.
If I could just add to that answer, Crown's pokies with the cashless card are down about 20 to 25%, which is what you'd expect with people when they're setting their limits, not mesmerised, hypnotised in front of the machine, setting the limits beforehand, you would expect it to be down, and that's great. The central monitoring system in Victoria allows us to know that the pokies within 5 kilometres radius of Crown, which don't have the card, are all up. And central monitoring that gives us that visibility about displacement. So it is a very critical part.
Is there any reason to delay implementation of the central monitoring system in the ACT as we maybe figure out some of the other elements of cashless gaming?
I think we could start down the road of having a central monitoring system immediately. Many of the features that collectively we're calling for are relatively simply built in. And if you have designed the central monitoring system effectively from the outset to know that those are potential features, that should not be a problem at all. I mean, so there are two questions here. One is the technical. And it's not rocket science, but it does take a little while to implement. And the second is political will. And so let's get started on the technical and let's move on political will as quickly as we can on the backbone of a really good central monitoring system. The one additional point I would make about a central monitoring system is that the risks of money laundering are not dealt with as effectively without a central monitoring system. So it is quite important for both the harm reduction and the anti-money laundering features.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've spoken with many people here around my views around the fact that the ACT government has had a long-term policy of reducing machine numbers in the territory. And my argument, I guess, that I want to sort of run past you is if you are going down the track, so the CMS in itself is $70 million, plus all these other harm minimisation measures through the cashless account-based system is X amount more on top of that. I believe if you implement that you will solidify machines in the territory for decades to come. I do not believe the government would be in a position to spend that money to then say we will continue to reduce machine numbers. So I guess my pitch is that you do not have a universal system, but you have a cashless system with all the measures that you talked about, Mr. Costello, but you continue to reduce machine numbers to a 20-year goal of none or minimal machines in the territory. So I'm interested in your views on this trade-off, I guess, that
The position where we're at in the ACT in terms of decisions that need to be made.
Can I just say, oh, sorry, Tim, you go. Because
Yeah,
we're
look,
losing you.
I'm very sympathetic to what you're trying to do there. If I had my way, there wouldn't be any pokey in any clubs or pubs. There'd be maybe a casino, which you've got to get to, destination gambling, you know, and getting out is a different business to when they're in pubs and clubs and on every fourth or fifth spot. Both Productivity Commission said, why does Australia's greatest gambling officers per head in the world? Because we have the greatest accessibility. So reducing machines, reducing accessibility, I am very, very sympathetic to. Politically, I've watched now for 25 years, nothing happened. And I'm, as a realist, going, the cashless card at last, though it got defeated. You might remember when the Gillard government tried to introduce it, they run, Clubs New South Wales ran the Un-Australian campaign, and it was the mother of all fear campaigns. A realist in me says it is not likely that we're going to see fast, systematic reduction of pokies, given that political clout and muscle of this industry is so entrenched. That's the matter for you?
And you.
Yeah.
We've lost you, Tim. No, we can't hear you.
So we,
He's still going.
look, we'll let Reverend Costello know when he's back. Any other thoughts on that question?
I'm just wondering why they're mutually exclusive, because, you know, I mean, if ever there were going to be a situation where we weren't going to have poker machines in the ACT, and God forbid, I can't imagine that situation given what I've seen with governments all around our country. The reason we are the biggest losers in the world is because we have governments that strongly support gambling in this country, well beyond any other country. So if that happens, that's great, but it's unlikely to, and why would it be mutually exclusive? I mean, in the meantime, we're seeing massive increases every year-on-year increases in losses. We're seeing enormous harms related to that. So why wouldn't we aim for both?
Okay, look, we might just move. I've got another substantive line. I'm interested in the issue of money laundering, and I think, Dr. Bowles, you kind of mentioned how that would be a problem solved in the ACT, or words to that effect. What evidence do we have of money laundering in the ACT, and to what degree? Because it's my understanding that the Australian Crimes Investigative Commission doesn't identify Canberra as a money laundering centre, so to speak.
Yeah. And I hope my earlier testimony did not suggest that we currently are. What I am arguing is that as other jurisdictions become increasingly alert to the extent of money laundering through EGMs and are taking practical steps to reduce them, that we will become de facto the only place to do it on the East Coast. So I was...
Raising the risk then?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would call it almost an inevitability, but yes.
Do others have an opinion on money laundering as a like a policy driver to say we need to do something?
We don't feel we have expertise in that.
Okay.
I mean, just going off the New South Wales Crime Commission report, I mean, it's quite clear that money laundering doesn't stop at borders. It is in the ACT, absolutely it is. And
evidence for that?
And well, I mean, you know, what's the evidence there isn't? That's what I'd ask, because there isn't evidence there isn't, and it would be almost nonsensical to think that there isn't, given the Crime Commission's evidence of extensive money laundering. If we don't do something, as Devon says...
I do note they do give a figure of the problem in New South Wales into the, tens of millions. Yeah. They give a figure. Yeah. I'm not sure I've seen that for the ACT, that's all.
No, because we haven't gathered that evidence. But would we, it'd be naive to suggest that we wouldn't have that situation in the ACT, and that if measures are introduced elsewhere, it won't end up being an issue for the ACT. It will.
Well, again, if there's any evidence that any of you have on that question, the committee would appreciate it. I might let Dr. Patterson have the next substantive.
Yep, thank you. If we have mandatory cashless gaming in every venue in the ACT, do we need ATMs in venues anymore?
No.
Can't put cash in a machine?
What we, sorry, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things we've said, and that the New South Wales Crime Commission and all of the relevant inquiries that have looked at a mandatory cashless gambling card, and they recommend binding and default limits, but they also recommend no credit for gambling. So that's the issue for us, is that whatever card is introduced, that it doesn't enable credit, because we know that that is a significant cause of harm.
Okay, others on that?
I don't think we have established a view on that, I'm sorry.
I guess perhaps going to your comment earlier around the fact that you're looking and discussing with clients their financial statements, and you see multiple transactions going, and we know that it's definitely a red flag behaviour, continually going to ATMs. It's come up in multiple news, news articles around how this is part of the problem.
Yeah.
So do you think, going to the mandatory cashless system in venues would go a long way to eradicating this problem?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Just can't see you.
I can't see me. All right, sorry about that. Can you see me?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes the video feed interrupts the sound, so maybe just leave it on sound.
Oh, okay. So I certainly agree with that. The New South Wales Crime Commission's report about people who would collect money, go to an ATM, make a pretense that it's cash, that explains or unexplained wealth, a real problem. I think the thing about Crown that impressed me yesterday was everyone showing ID, passport, licence to get a card, is then monitored, no reason to go to an ATM, absolutely none. And not just monitored because the machine's literally disabled once you're over the time they've set. It's monitoring what's going on even before a machine disables, before time or money limit. That's because you're not just going and getting cash from an ATM. The actual visibility about it really does help with intervention.
So, ICOS definitely supports a system in which you cannot pay cash directly for gambling. However, one point raised has been that for harm reduction, you want to introduce as much friction into gambling as possible. And so the question of how to put money on a card of the sort that Reverend Costello has just outlined is an important one. So if that can be done from your phone, still in front of the EGM, that is relatively little friction. You're just tapping into your credit or your bank account and shifting the money. If ever you have to get up, go to the ATM, withdraw it, and then go to a separate machine, insert your card, and put that in, that is a de facto break that is enabling you to have a little space to decide, do I want to keep gambling?
And apologies, I think we misunderstood the question. I completely agree with that point about friction. We would also really like consideration of lockout periods and delays whenever there is a move to top up. So that's reintroducing friction, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to what you said before as well, having it as a card and instead of as cash also brings a bit more awareness back to the person who is gambling. So quite often what I see with clients as well, with those big cash withdrawals, not only is it at the clubs, it's also at when they get their groceries, getting a bit of cash out then. And it's that confusion around, well, where was that spent? How was that spent? I know I spent some on gambling, but I also spent some on this. Okay, maybe it was just $20 on gambling. So what it does is it really brings an awareness to the community member of what they are spending on gambling. So that's a benefit that I see.
Yeah, provided those other safeguards.
Yes.
Just a very quick supplementary, Reverend Costello, with the Crown system, is that just for machines or does that include table games, Keno, everything within that venue?
It includes tables, it includes all card play. I think there are still some high roller tables it doesn't include. And with the pokies, you get a running total of how much you've lost, how close you're getting to your financial limit. It comes up on the screen. So that notion that I don't know how much, they've actually built that into the system. I must say, I went agnostic about what they're doing. I came out of Oliver. It was so far ahead of, what we were told is technically possible. Because for 25 years, the industry has opposed these cards. And I was quite surprised about the visibility, transparency. Look, I have lines of queues of people from interstate Grand Prix time. And when it's a New South Wales licence, which is digital, no one from New South Wales could actually prove their identity and get a card. They've got some problems to iron out. But I was impressed with people know how much they've lost, how close they are time-wise to being their limit and locked out. It looked pretty good to me. Time will tell.
I have a supplementary on that. So it's my understanding that Crown allows cash and cashless. Are you saying that cash is only available in certain high roller tables, or is it available as an option for the machines as well?
No, not an option for the machine at all. That's why I said yes to getting rid of ATMs to go cashless. Look, the high rollers, they seem to always have special rules. We all know Crown's high roller business has basically collapsed though, with the Chinese market collapsing. So it's not a great loophole, but no, it's carded everywhere else.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Bradley, substantive.
Just a question about facial recognition technology and its usefulness or otherwise in helping get gaming harm minimisation. Does anyone have any perspectives on that?
We do. We don't support it. We don't think, if you introduce a mandatory pre-commitment system with binding and default limits, there is absolutely no reason to have facial recognition technology. There's also questions around the governance and the privacy data that is collected and who's holding that data and what they're doing with that data. We've seen examples in the US of industry with facial recognition technology data being used for purposes to increase people's losses and improve their profits. Mm-hmm. If there's no governance around it, and I heard the Minister say earlier, there is no legislation around it in the ACT, so it is being used in the ACT, we know that. What's happening to people's data? Are people giving informed consent? Is it being used for self-exclusion or other purposes? Mm-hmm. So we don't support it.
Similarly, the system at Crown Casino in Melbourne, if you need to show ID to get the card initially, then your identity is linked with that card. My memory of the system at Crown is that it does not link your particular face at a particular machine with the card. So the face recognition technology would not add any additional protection, and the scope for misuse, as outlined by Ms. Bennett, is quite extensive. And also, I think the extent of privacy risk and identity theft is also extensive.
Mm-hmm. And the Minister for Gaming described it as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff in terms of it only works for those who choose to self-exclude and doesn't meet the requirement of preset limits and so forth. Is that also much your understanding?
Yes.
Supplementary. Do you think we need to move on from the idea around industry controlling data, and that given, so with Tasmania's 70 million central monitoring system, that is run by Tabcorp. I have little doubt that any ACT system would similarly be run by some form of the gambling industry. In terms of facial recognition, knowing how difficult it is for venue staff to pick up people by their face going into venues, it really doesn't work. So we do need to do something. I do take the point around cashless being an option. We can stop people setting up digital wallets, but there's still all those people who are on exclusion registers that we do need to monitor, that we can't just let them go. That, you know, we've got facial recognition technology going at every supermarket transaction, every checkout. Do you think it's just time that we move past that block and go, it is absolutely mandatory, if you have gaming machines, this is a feature of your venue and your gaming floor?
I think in terms of exclusion, if you have a central monitoring system with one card for all venues, then if someone has self-excluded, they've self-excluded. You don't need facial recognition. I think as a society we have yet to thoroughly think through the implications of industry having access to that much of our personal information. I also hesitate because a gambling venue looking to maximize profits might well invest in face recognition technology that is not just recognition, but analyzes things for like facial expression, etc., which could absolutely be used to steer people towards greater losses. Because you would have computerized assessment of vulnerability at certain times.
And in fact, that's what did happen in the US.
We heard from Gambling Technology Association this morning or earlier, and he was saying, because I put that same question to him, do you need facial recognition anymore? And he was saying, well, with the cards, people can still give their card to someone else. They can play, someone can use someone else's account to play. So do we need both?
I mean, I think if the carded system is the verification process, as Tim pointed out, if you've got passports, licences, if there's a high bar set for the initial verification system, there is no reason that should be an issue. You shouldn't be able to, just as you can't. So, I mean, it's like a bank card. If you steal someone's bank card and try and use it, there should be safeguards in place that enable that not to work. So, Tim?
When you, I saw yesterday, when you put a card in, you have to put in your own number, like your own password number. So it is like a bank card at that point. And that impressed me. To your question about, you know, who controls the data, I do think this is very critical. Victor Dominello introduced the digital New South Wales licence and was for gaming minister, and you know, lost his job there because he recommended cashless cards. For some of you who follow New South Wales politics, Clubs New South Wales that demanded his scalp. He always said to me, who has the information is critical. He said, I don't mind if clubs, you know, call the cashless card after their club. If I have central monitoring with real-time access to the play going on, the losses going on real-time, we can intervene. We can actually manage this. The industry having facial recognition just plays into their hands. And the one criticism I had of Crown yesterday was when you line up to get your card, where you line up, and there were a number of long queues, it's still called the loyalty program. Reward, loyalty. Now, I raised that with them. He himself, the chair of the Crown Board, was on this tour with me. Why are you still calling it reward and loyalty? It's a hangover from all that data that facial recognition just plays into Who controls that, I think, is very important. But it can be branded different ways as long as it's real-time access, which the industry's always had to state governments and people who need to intervene that never have.
Look, thank you. We've really come to a close. We've got another session and others waiting. I'd like to thank our witnesses for your attendance today. You're certainly most welcome to put in further thoughts and submissions to inform the committee's report.
Can I just put in one request for ACCOS for further information on those examples of misuse of facial recognition technology in the US you mentioned on notice?
And thank you. Is that okay? You'll take that on notice?
We'll take that on notice.
So if there are questions, take it on notice. Please provide them within the committee secretary within 5 business days of receiving the uncorrected proof of cancer. Look, thank you all so much. Obviously, there's much more that we could be talking about, but please send in your other thoughts. The committee will consider those.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.